But let's bring you this ongoing discussion then. The National Treasury, in just a moment, is going to be, I suppose, have its work cut out for them. But first, take a look at this. All right, now I can tell you a bit more about it. National Treasury is set to implement the two-pot retirement system come Sunday, allowing employees to access some of their retirement funds during their working years. Now, Sanlam's Benchmark 2024 research called Accelerating a Better Working South Africa shows the number of individuals planning to cash out funds through this amendment has jumped significantly from 31% back in 2022, now at 59% in 2024. So as the countdown to the two-pot system begins, let's continue answering some of your questions. Joining us now in studio is Shoniwa, who is the Managing Executive with Sanlam's Umbrella Solutions. And as I mentioned, is with us here in our Auckland Park studios. Nzwananai, it's great to see you. Thanks for popping by.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ananda.
The countdown really is on, but there's still a lot of FAQs, I like to call them. But sometimes I worry, Nzwananai, that we don't really have a grasp of how we got here. And perhaps that's a good place to start. I mean, government says they're hoping that this particular intervention will improve South Africa's retirement outcomes.
Yes.
But how will it do that?
Yeah, so yes, it's definitely a good place to start. There's a lot of misconceptions about what we're trying to achieve here. And, you know, for us as an industry, this is a change to the retirement system that we do support. And that's simply because from a retirement perspective, the stats that CIS has released says that only about 6% of South Africans that retire comfortably. And for us, retiring comfortably means you can replace about 70% of your final salary in retirement. But that's not happening, so only 6% can manage that. So we've gotten here through the fact that most people, when they change jobs, accessing their retirement savings at the new job, they start again. So by the point they get to retirement, they don't have enough. So this two-pot retirement system is not only about the early access, which is what everyone's talking about. There's also the preservation part. So with the three pots that you would have, the savings pot, the vested pot, which is everything you've accumulated until August 2024, and then the retirement pot. The retirement pot you will not be able to access now when you change jobs. So that's the big change. So I think in a few years, in 10, 15 years, with that retirement pot that people are not able to access, they would have built up, you know, quite a sizable retirement allocation, which will help with the stats that we're seeing now where people just don't have enough when they get to retirement.
Yeah, which obviously becomes the burden of the state in many ways.
100%.
And you're right, a lot of the attention has been around this 10% that people are saying they might be able to access. And I think it was last week, SARS gave their own media briefing to try, I suppose, place what the real cost of this might be.
Correct.
If somebody decides to actually cash in on that. And in my circles, I've found the salient question people are still grappling with is it actually wise to go ahead with this, especially if you don't really need the funds?
100%, yeah. And you know, we've actually deliberately moved away from calling it the savings pot. We keep referring to it as an emergency pot. And that's simply because this has been put in place for people that are struggling financially and need some sort of access to some sort of savings that they have. We saw what's happened post-COVID, where most South Africans, the only savings that they have is within their retirement savings. So what we've, you know, sort of spoken about with participating employers, with members, is for members to understand that it's in your best interest to leave the savings pot invested within your retirement savings unless you need it for any emergency that might happen. I think COVID was really the point where, you know, National Treasury decided that they needed to put a plan in place. And it comes, you know, it also plays out when you look at some of the stats within South Africa, where I think the debt levels that you find in the country have also played a role, where a lot of our employers talk to us about their members or their employees being so much in debt that it's affecting, obviously, you know, their productivity at work. And one of the stats, you spoke about the benchmark survey now that we just did in July 2024. One of the stats that came out of the benchmark survey was issues around financial stress. And what we're seeing at Sanlam Corporate is that most of the financial stress that's coming through is due to debt levels that sit within the economy. Now, those debt levels are leading to other mental disorders such as anxiety, depression, which obviously then affect employers from an absenteeism, presenteeism perspective. So when we talk about emergency pot and how it can help, it's obviously helping with some of those some of the debts that people have where they're paying quite a high interest rate and lower the financial stress that they have. But I think when you look at the memes and you listen to people, that I don't think that's what the plan is. But hopefully people will understand what Treasury and government is trying to do with this seeding that's going to happen 1 September.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's in their best interest, especially because life continues after the 1st of September.
Correct.
I suspect many people aren't able to think that far. We live in a country, in a world, frankly, where we've seen criminality become rampant, especially when it comes to money issues. SARS, for example, is always sending out alerts around the end of any kind of tax season to be aware of the fraudsters. Yeah. I imagine they too are watching very closely how this two-pot system is going to unfold. Yeah. And I wonder what we should be thinking about as somebody who is hoping to legitimately cash in on this around things like fraud.
Yeah, that's obviously a big one for the industry. And again, one of the big issues that we grapple with within South Africa is issues around financial literacy. A lot of people don't understand, what they have from a savings perspective, and with new legislation coming in, how will they access those savings? So, in line with what a lot of our competitors or industry participants are doing, from our side, what we're doing is that the only way you can access your savings is firstly through digital means, so you have to do it online. So that's the first sort of protection that we have. From that, you would get an OTP via SMS or email, which you then need to verify to carry on to get that access. But I think importantly from our side is that we're also then liaising with the employer to make sure that the payment only goes into the same banking details that's being used for your salary on a monthly basis. So we're not going to allow a different set of banking details to what you currently use on a monthly basis to access your salary. So that's what we've put in place. But what you can't run away from within our context is the number of people that can still have a conversation with someone and convince them that let's do it this way. Even if it comes to your bank account, I need to access a percentage of it because I've helped you, which is not the case. We're hoping that working closely with employers and using those verified banking details, the money will get to the right people who actually need it and hopefully accessing it for emergencies.
Yeah. As is the case with any contentious issue, it allows us to speak about so much else around our society. You spoke, for example, around high stress and anxiety levels that people are going through because of their debt. I found the argument made by some unions very interesting around this concept that, the cost of living in and of itself is so high. And that has kind of forced a lot of workers to be desperately in wait or in want of this particular retirement. Yeah. And they reckon the real solution here, if you want to improve retirement outcomes in the country, is to actually just fix the economy and make sure there's enough economic growth so that people have enough money to save and get to a point in their retirement where they can, live comfortably.
And that is spot on. Again, from our research, a lot of the conversations that we had with people in the street, with employers, is around how do we improve the unemployment rate, for example? How do we get more youth coming into the working environment? Because I think the other misconception that sits around two-pot is the numbers. So we've got a lot of people that still think that they're going to have access to 10% of their accumulated retirement savings. That is not the case. You're going to have access to either 10% capped at a maximum of 30,000.
Right.
So only those who've got 300,000 or more saved up will get the 30,000. If you've got 100,000, you're only going to have access to 10,000. But after that, you must understand, and I know you had Edward Kiswetter here yesterday, I think. Once we've seeded that 30,000, if you qualify for the maximum, there's still going to be tax that needs to be deducted. And that tax that's going to be deducted is at your marginal tax rate. So whatever tax bracket you're in, you could pay as high as 45% tax if you are in the highest tax bracket. So it's not 30,000 that's landing in your bank account. Now, to your comment, Ayanda, you must understand that for the maximum, which is 30,000, after you've been taxed at 45,000, that's and then there's an admin fee that's being charged by administrators.
You're now going to have half.
Correct. You could get less than half. And importantly, something that Edward also touched on was the fact that if you've got any tax outstanding with SARS, that is also going to be deducted before the administrators make any payment to you. So you could get zero. And I think that's where people need to understand that as much as this has been put in place to help employees, to help union members, I don't think it's a long-term solution that's going to alleviate, the debt levels that they talk about, to alleviate the cost of living that they're talking about. I think that's more issue for the government to fix in terms of, structurally how the economy is set up at the moment.
Yeah. I wonder, though, in the line of work that you're doing, and I'm deviating slightly from what we were going to speak about, but I think it's still worth asking, whether there is any kind of best practice, even around the world, of countries who are getting this important challenge right. And I don't think we spend nearly enough time speaking about how we could make sure that people are retirement ready, because a point that was made earlier is that any generation that isn't ready for retirement is actually a burden on the younger generation
100%.
who have to pay the tax to make sure that they sustain through social grants.
Yeah. The step that's been taken now with two-pot legislation coming in, we feel strongly that this is a step in the right direction for South Africa. Simply because as much as we only talk about early access now, effective 1 September next week, in the long term, in 15 years' time, the fact that people won't have access to everything that's been put into that retirement pot, whether you change jobs 7 times, 10 times, but you don't have access to that retirement pot until you reach retirement. The modeling that we've done tells us that at some stage in the future, it means that it will lead to better retirement outcomes. So remember, from 1 September, your new contribution, so if you contribute 3,000 rands, for example, on a monthly basis to your retirement fund, 2,000 is going to the retirement pot, and only 1,000 is going to the savings pot, which you've got access to. You're not forced to access the 1,000, right. You can keep it there. But there's 2,000 that you no longer have access to when you change jobs or whatever happens. As that grows, we feel that in the future, that will definitely help with retirement outcomes. So I think that's a step in the right direction for an economy such as ours. And you speak about, best practice. Best practice it's 2 things for us. Preservation is the main thing that needs to play out. And this is the first step that the Treasury has taken. But another one that I think needs to play out within our economy, and this is a place where ourselves in the industry has a role to play, is to increase the levels of financial literacy. People do not understand what retirement is, what the impact is of the decisions that they make today. The impact of accessing that savings pot and accessing it on an annual basis, given that you be allowed 1 withdrawal per year. People don't understand what that impact is when they get to retirement at 60. People live longer now. We all know where the medical industry is. People live much longer. So you work and save for 40 years to have enough to live for another 40 years after that. So you need to have as much as possible by the time you get to retirement. And to have as much as possible, I think preservation is definitely the first step. But preservation and financial advice, where we also help by increasing financial literacy, those are the aspects that we feel will definitely improve retirement outcomes.
Yeah. You spoke earlier about memes, and it reminded me of how much of an instant gratification society we've become. Yeah. And in that world, it's difficult to digest this idea of long-term savings.
Correct.
And playing the long game. But hopefully we'll be able to get it right rather sooner than later, especially when we consider what's at stake. Thank you so much for popping by. Hopefully we've been able to iron out some of those important questions, but I know Sanlam is going to be sticking around on the SABC as we continue ventilating this issue. But for now, Shoniwa, thanks for coming through. Nzwananai is the managing executive with Sanlam's Umbrella Solutions, helping us have a better understanding of this two-pot system set to kick in from Sunday.